massive alien ship cut through Earth's blue sky like a silver knife. Inside the transport vessel, 12 young aliens sat in perfect rows, their strange faces filled with excitement and pride. They wore shiny armor that seemed to glow in the ship's soft light. Each one came from a different world, but they all shared one thing. They were the best military students in the entire galaxy. Commander Velthor stood at the front of the ship, his tall figure casting a shadow over the students. His skin was pale blue and covered in small scales that caught the light. He had been teaching warfare for over 200 years, and his reputation stretched across a dozen star systems. Today, he was bringing his students to a backwater planet called Earth for what he considered a simple field trip. "Listen carefully," Velthor said, his voice deep and commanding. "We are about to land on a world that the Galactic Council has classified as extremely dangerous. The creatures living there call themselves humans." He paused, looking at each student. "These humans have never received proper military training. They fight like wild animals, using crude weapons and brutal tactics. We are here to study them like scientists study primitive tribes." One of the students, a young female with crystal-like skin named Zara, raised her hand. "Commander, why do we need to study such backward creatures?" Velthar smiled, showing teeth that were perfectly straight and white. "Because sometimes, dear Zara, we can learn what not to do by watching failures. These humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years, yet they still use metal projectiles instead of energy weapons. They have no shields, no proper formations, and no understanding of civilized warfare." The ship shuddered slightly as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Through the windows, the students could see a world covered in blue oceans and green land. It looked peaceful enough, but they had all read the reports. This planet was home to creatures so violent that they had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. Wars, diseases, natural disasters. Somehow, humans had survived them all through nothing but pure stubbornness as they descended toward the military base. The alien students pressed their faces to the windows. They saw buildings that looked ancient compared to their gleaming cities. The vehicles on the ground moved on wheels instead of hovering gracefully through the air. Everything about this world seemed primitive and rough. At Fort Mitchell, Colonel Jack Peterson stood waiting on the landing pad. He was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes that had seen too many battles. Next to him stood Major Kate Wilson from the Marine Corps, her red hair pulled back in a tight bun. Captain Tom Bradley from Special Forces kept checking his watch, while Sergeant Beth Collins from the Rangers scanned the sky with the practiced eye of someone always watching for danger. "Think they know what they're getting into?" Wilson asked. Quietly, Peterson shrugged. "Probably not, but that's their problem." The alien ship landed with barely a whisper, its advanced engines making no sound at all. A ramp lowered from the bottom, and the delegation began to emerge. The humans tried not to stare, but it was hard not to be amazed. Each alien looked different. Some had multiple arms, others had skin that changed colors, and a few had eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. Commander Velter stepped down first, his armor making soft humming sounds. He looked around the base with obvious disappointment, taking in the concrete buildings and metal fences. Everything here was so plain, so brutally functional. "Greetings," Peterson said, walking forward with his hand extended. "Welcome to Earth. We're excited to work with you and learn about galactic military techniques." Velthar looked at the offered hand for a moment before reluctantly taking it. His translator box, a small device attached to his collar, converted his words into English. "Yes, we are here to observe your methods. Perhaps we can teach you more efficient ways of conducting warfare." Captain Bradley shot a look at Wilson, who had to bite back a smile. The aliens clearly thought they were dealing with cave dwellers who barely knew which end of a weapon to hold. "We've prepared quarters for your students," Peterson continued. "Tomorrow, we can begin joint training exercises. I think you'll find our soldiers quite ... adaptable. One of the alien students, a young male with 4 arms and purple skin, stepped forward. Forgive me, but are those projectile weapons? He pointed at the rifles carried by the human guards. Sergeant Collins nodded. Standard issue M4 carbines. The alien students began whispering among themselves in their various languages. Some seemed amused, others looked concerned. How could these humans hope to fight with such ancient technology? Do not worry, Veltor announced loudly. We have brought training weapons that fire harmless energy pulses. Your primitive firearms will not be needed during our exercises. The humans exchanged glances again. Peterson's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained polite. That's very generous of you, Commander. I'm sure this will be a learning experience for everyone. As the alien delegation was led toward their quarters, the students continued to marvel at the crude simplicity of everything around them. The buildings were made of concrete and steel instead of smart materials that could repair themselves. The vehicles burned fossil fuels instead of using clean energy cells. Even the humans themselves looked rough and scarred, so different from the polished perfection of galactic citizens. What the aliens didn't notice were the small details that any soldier would recognize. The way the human guards moved with complete confidence through their environment. How their eyes never stopped scanning for threats. The fact that every piece of equipment, no matter how old it looked, was perfectly maintained and ready for use. They didn't see Captain Bradley quietly speaking into his radio, alerting the base commanders that their guests had arrived with some very interesting assumptions about human capabilities. They missed the slight smile on Sergeant Collins's face as she watched the aliens dismiss the humans' weapons and tactics. Most importantly, they failed to understand that they had just landed in the middle of a military base filled with soldiers who had learned their skills not in comfortable classrooms, but in the unforgiving crucible of real combat. These humans had been forged by a world that tried to kill them from the moment they were born, and they had not just survived, they had thrived. The stage was set for a clash between two very different ideas of what it meant to be a warrior. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the briefing room as both human and alien soldiers gathered for their first joint training session. The air was thick with tension, though the humans tried to hide their amusement behind professional masks. The aliens, on the other hand, carried themselves with the confidence of teachers about to educate backward children. Cadet Vera stepped forward, her crystal-like skin catching the light as she moved. She came from Proxima, one of the most advanced military worlds in the galaxy, and her every gesture radiated superiority. With a wave of her hand, she activated a holographic projector that filled the center of the room with a three-dimensional city block complete with buildings, streets, and defensive positions. "Observe carefully," Vera announced, her voice carrying the tone of someone speaking to slow students. "This is how proper urban warfare is conducted by civilized species." She pointed to various locations on the map, her finger leaving glowing trails in the air. "First, we establish energy barriers at these key intersections. These force fields will stop any projectile weapons your enemies might use." The human soldiers watched politely, though Sergeant Beth Collins couldn't help but shift in her seat. She had fought in 3 urban conflicts and knew that cities never behaved like neat holographic models. "Next," Vera continued, manipulating the display to show small figures moving in perfect formation. "Our forces advance in standard diamond patterns. Each soldier maintains exactly 12 meters from his nearest teammate, creating perfect shield overlap. This formation is mathematically proven to provide maximum protection while advancing toward objectives." Captain Tom Bradley, sitting in the back row, leaned over to Major Kate Wilson. 12 meters, he whispered. "In urban terrain, they'd be picked off in seconds." Wilson nodded slightly, but kept her eyes on the presentation. Vera was now showing how the alien forces would methodically clear each building, room by room, using their energy weapons to blast through walls in predetermined patterns. Everything was precise, calculated, and completely predictable. This approach, Vera concluded proudly, eliminates uncertainty and reduces casualties to acceptable minimums. It is the culmination of thousands of years of military evolution. Collins raised her hand. What happens if the enemy doesn't stay in those positions? What about flanking attacks? Vera looked at her with obvious pity. Flanking maneuvers are primitive tactics used by species that lack proper technology. When you have superior shields and weapons, such crude methods become unnecessary. The enemy cannot harm you, so there is no need for complex movements. The other alien students nodded in agreement. To them, warfare was like a chess game with predetermined moves. You advanced your pieces according to proven strategies, used your superior technology to overwhelm the opponent, and achieved victory through mathematical superiority. Would you like to demonstrate? Colonel Jack Peterson asked from the front of the room. We've set up a mock urban environment on the training ground. Within an hour, both groups were suited up and ready. The aliens wore their gleaming armor, their energy shields creating a slight shimmer around their bodies. Their weapons hummed with barely contained power, and their movements were perfectly coordinated as they took their positions. The training ground had been transformed into a replica city block, complete with buildings, alleyways, and scattered obstacles. The objective was simple: capture the command center located in the central building. The aliens advanced exactly as Vera had described. They established their energy barriers, formed their diamond patterns, and began their methodical advance. Their shields deflected the training rounds fired by automated defenders, and their energy weapons cut through obstacles with surgical precision. It was textbook perfect, exactly like their simulations. Then it was the humans' turn. Captain Bradley gathered his team of 6 soldiers in a quick huddle. No fancy equipment, no energy shields, just standard combat gear and weapons that the aliens considered ancient. You know the drill, he said simply, fast and dirty. What happened next left the alien observers speechless. Instead of advancing down the main street like civilized soldiers, the humans immediately scattered in different directions. 2 soldiers disappeared into storm drains that hadn't even appeared on the tactical maps. Another pair began climbing the outside of a building, using window ledges and fire escapes, like a jungle gym. The remaining 2 started a small fire in a trash can, creating thick smoke that drifted across the training ground within minutes. The carefully planned urban environment descended into controlled chaos. The humans moved through the city like they had grown up in its streets. They used everything around them. Broken glass became mirrors to see around corners. Loose bricks became thrown weapons, and even graffiti on walls provided information about enemy positions. The automated defenders that had barely slowed the alien advance were quickly overwhelmed. The humans didn't try to fight through the defenses. They went around them, under them, and sometimes right over them. They moved in ways the defensive systems hadn't been programmed to expect. One human soldier actually swung from building to building using rope he had improvised from electrical cables. Another crawled through ventilation systems that weren't supposed to be large enough for a person. The whole attack looked less like a military operation and more like organized insanity. The alien students watched in growing confusion as their neat tactical understanding crumbled. "They're not following any formation," muttered Cadet Rex from the Hegemony Worlds. "How do they coordinate without proper communication protocols?" "Look at their movement patterns," whispered another alien. "They're adapting constantly. Every few seconds they change tactics based on new information." What the aliens didn't understand was that the humans weren't following a pre-planned strategy at all. They were improvising, reacting, and thinking on their feet in ways that no military academy could teach. Each soldier was making dozens of micro-decisions every minute, adjusting their approach based on instinct and experience. When the exercise ended, Captain Bradley's team had captured the objective in less than half the time it had taken the aliens. They had done it without energy shields, without advanced weapons, and without following any of the proper military procedures that Vera had so confidently explained. The alien students stood in stunned silence as the humans regrouped, laughing and joking about their improvised tactics. To the aliens, what they had just witnessed seemed impossible. It violated everything they had learned about warfare. But that's not how it's supposed to work, Rex said weakly. You can't just ... make it up as you go. Major Wilson walked over to the confused alien cadets, her face serious but not unkind. Kid, let me tell you something about human warfare. We've been fighting on this planet for so long that we've learned one simple truth. The enemy never does what you expect them to do, so we stopped expecting them to cooperate with our plans. The implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in for the alien students. Everything they had been taught about proper military procedure, all their advanced technology and mathematical precision, had been rendered useless by opponents who refused to fight by the rules. As they walked back to the base, Vera found herself wondering for the first time if perhaps there was more to warfare than what she had learned. In her pristine classrooms, back on Proxima, the third day of training dawned cold and misty, with fog rolling through the pine forests surrounding Fort Mitchell. What had started as friendly demonstrations between the species had transformed into something much more serious. The alien students, who had arrived with such confidence, now whispered among themselves with growing concern. These humans were not behaving like any enemy they had studied. Commander Velthor announced the morning's exercise with his usual authority. Today we will conduct forest warfare training. My students will demonstrate proper woodland tactics against a smaller human force. He gestured toward the dense tree line. This will show the importance of superior numbers and advanced equipment in natural terrain. Sergeant David Kim stepped forward with 5 other human soldiers. They wore simple camouflage uniforms and carried basic weapons, nothing that glowed, hummed, or projected energy shields. Against them stood 12 alien cadets equipped with thermal sensors that could detect body heat from half a mile away, motion detectors that picked up the slightest movement, and energy weapons that could cut through tree trunks. The objective is simple, Velthor explained. Locate and capture the enemy force. My students have every technological advantage. This should be concluded quickly. The aliens spread out in a perfect search formation, just like their training manuals instructed. They moved with mechanical precision, covering every angle, scanning every shadow with their advanced sensors. Their equipment painted a detailed picture of the forest heat signatures, air movements, even the chemical composition of nearby plants. But 6 hours passed, and they found nothing. The human soldiers had simply vanished into the forest like smoke. Not a single sensor reading, not one glimpse of movement, nothing. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Cadet Terra, whose purple skin had the ability to change colors for camouflage, crouched behind a fallen log and whispered into her communicator. This is impossible. Our thermal scanners show no human heat signatures anywhere in the search area. What she didn't know was that Kim's team had spent the night covering themselves in mud and wet leaves, masking their body heat. They moved so slowly that motion detectors couldn't distinguish them from swaying branches. When they needed to communicate, they used hand signals, learned from hunters and ancient warriors. The humans had become part of the forest itself. For hours, the aliens marched through the woods, their advanced equipment scanning uselessly. They followed their predetermined search patterns, checked off their tactical objectives, and grew increasingly frustrated. This wasn't how warfare was supposed to work. The enemy should be detectable, should follow logical movement patterns, should make mistakes that technology could exploit. Instead, they were hunting ghosts. The first sign of the human presence was a bird call that sounded slightly wrong. Cadet Rex, whose species had enhanced hearing, tilted his head. That's odd. The acoustic pattern doesn't match local wildlife. Before he could investigate further, a stone bounced off a tree 20 yards to his left, then another to his right, then a third behind him. The alien spun in circles, trying to identify the source, but saw nothing but empty forest. Contact, contact. One of them shouted into his radio. We're taking fire from multiple positions. But there was no fire, just stones, bird calls, and the growing realization that they were completely surrounded by an enemy they couldn't see. When the attack finally came, it happened so fast that the alien equipment couldn't track it. Human soldiers materialized from the forest floor, from hollow logs, from positions that should have been impossible to hide in. They came from 6 different directions at once, moving with a coordination that seemed telepathic. Kim's team had fashioned weapons from branches and stones, created traps from vines and thorns, and turned the entire forest into their ally. They fought like the forest itself had come alive and decided to join the battle. Cadet Tara found herself face down in the dirt, with her hands zip-tied behind her back, before she even realized the attack had begun. Kim helped her to her feet, with gentle but firm hands. How? She asked, staring at him in disbelief. Our sensors are military grade. They can detect a heartbeat from 1,000 meters. How did you hide from them? Kim smiled and brushed leaves. From her armor, you were looking for soldiers. We became part of the forest. Your technology is impressive, but it's designed to find enemies who fight like you do. But the coordination, the timing, how did you communicate without radio signals? We were monitoring all frequencies, same way humans have been hunting. Together for 100,000 years, Kim replied. We read each other, read the environment, and trusted our instincts. The alien students were beginning to understand that they faced something their education had never prepared them for. These humans didn't just use the environment, they became part of it. The real shock came during hand-to-hand combat training. That afternoon, Lieutenant Jake Torres stepped into the ring against Cadet Quinn, whose species was known for their incredible strengths. Quinn stood 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and muscles that could crush steel. The fight lasted less than a minute. Quinn landed what should have been a fight-ending blow directly to Torres's ribs. The impact sounded like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef, and several aliens winced at the noise. Torres staggered backward, blood trickling from his mouth, his breathing labored. Any civilized species would have stopped the fight immediately for medical attention. Instead, Torres wiped the blood away and grinned. Nice shot. My turn. Quinn backed away in horror. Your medical readings show internal damage. You need immediate care. How are you still standing? This. Torres touched his ribs gingerly and shrugged. I've had worse. Last month I fought 3 rounds with a broken hand. Week before that, finished a mission with a concussion. He moved forward again, his eyes focused and determined. Pain is just information. It tells you what's wrong, but it doesn't stop you from doing what needs to be done. The alien medical officer, Dr. Yen, pulled up Torres's vital signs on her scanner and stared at the readouts in amazement. This is medically impossible. His pain levels are off our measurement scale. He should be unconscious. Major Kate Wilson, watching from the sidelines, shook her head. Doc, you're looking at a species that evolved on a world trying to kill us every single day. We learned to fight through broken bones, infections, blood loss, and exhaustion because the alternative was death. Pain tolerance isn't just training for us, it's survival. That evening, the alien students gathered in their quarters to discuss what they had witnessed. Their confidence was cracking like ice in spring. Everything they thought they knew about warfare was being systematically dismantled by opponents who refused to follow any logical rules. They fight like the legends say. Demons fight, whispered one cadet. No, said Tara quietly. They fight like creatures who have never had the luxury of giving up. The humans, meanwhile, sat around their own informal meeting, discussing the alien students with a mixture of respect and concern. "They're good kids," Kim said. "Well-trained, disciplined, smart equipment, but they've never faced an enemy that wants to win more than they want to survive." Torres nodded, still favoring his injured side. "Everything about their training assumes the enemy will be reasonable, predictable. They've never fought anyone desperate enough to use anything and everything to win." The stage was being set for an even harder lesson. The alien students were about to discover that all their theoretical knowledge meant nothing when faced with humans who had learned warfare not in classrooms, but in the unforgiving school of life and death. The piercing wail of the emergency alarm shattered the quiet morning at Fort Mitchell. Lieutenant Amy Davis burst through the barracks doors, her face grim and urgent. Both human and alien soldiers scrambled from their bunks as her voice cut through the confusion. "This is not a drill. Research Station Echo has gone completely silent. We have confirmed hostile forces on site with multiple civilian casualties reported." She paused, catching her breath. "Intel suggests at least 20 scientists and support staff are trapped inside." Research Station Echo was a joint human facility located 30 miles from the base, where scientists worked on peaceful technology exchanges. It was supposed to be one of the safest places on Earth, protected by advanced security systems and diplomatic immunity. Commander Velthor stepped forward immediately, his crystalline armor catching the emergency lighting. "My students will handle this situation," he announced, with absolute confidence. "This presents an excellent opportunity for practical examination of their training under real conditions." Colonel Jack Peterson hesitated, his weathered face showing concern. "Commander, with all respect, this isn't a training scenario. Our intelligence suggests the attackers are using unconventional tactics. They're not following standard military protocols." Veltor waved dismissively. "All the more reason why proper military leadership is required. These attackers clearly lack discipline and training. Observe how civilized warfare principles resolve such chaotic situations." The alien students quickly assembled, their advanced equipment humming to life. They moved with the precision they had been taught, checking their energy weapons, activating their personal shields, and forming into their textbook assault formations. Everything was by the book, exactly as their instructors had drilled into them across dozens of worlds. Within 20 minutes, they were airborne in their sleek transport, heading toward the research station. The humans watched them go, their faces troubled, but saying nothing. Colonel Peterson had offered backup, but Velthor had refused, insisting his students needed to prove themselves without primitive assistance. The research station sat in a valley surrounded by dense woods and rocky outcroppings. From the air, it looked peaceful enough, a cluster of white buildings connected by covered walkways, with solar panels gleaming on the roofs. But as the alien transport approached, they could see broken windows and scorch marks on the walls. The aliens deployed exactly as their training demanded. They established a perimeter, set up their energy barriers, and began their methodical advance toward the main building. Their shields shimmered in the afternoon sun, deflecting the occasional sniper round that came their way. But within minutes, everything started going wrong. The attackers weren't fighting like any enemy the aliens had studied. Instead of meeting them in open battle, the hostiles melted away into the buildings like smoke. They used maintenance tunnels and air vents to move around unseen. They turned everyday objects into weapons. Fire extinguishers became bombs. Computer equipment became thrown projectiles. Even children's toys from the station's daycare center were rigged with explosives. Cadet Vera led the main assault team, her crystalline features set in determined lines. But her perfect formation began to crumble as enemies appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Her energy weapons, designed to punch through military armor, were useless against opponents who hid behind innocent civilians and used the station's own infrastructure as cover. "Command, "We're taking heavy casualties," Vera reported, her voice strained. "The enemy is using non-combatants as human shields. They've weaponized the entire facility." The situation deteriorated rapidly. The aliens' advanced sensors couldn't distinguish between hostiles and terrified civilians. Their energy weapons were too powerful to use safely in the confined spaces where the enemy had taken refuge. Every room became a deadly maze where their opponents used everything from medical equipment to office supplies as improvised weapons. 2 hours after the assault began, the alien force was in full retreat. Half of them were wounded, their confidence shattered, and the hostiles still controlled the research station. Vera limped back to the command post, her armor scorched and her pride in ruins. "They don't fight with any honor," she gasped to Commander Veld. "They use medical supplies as explosives. They hide behind children. They turn healing equipment into weapons of war. It's complete chaos. There are no rules, no formations, no civilized conduct whatsoever." Back at Fort Mitchell, Captain Tom Bradley was already suiting up with his 6-man team when Colonel Peterson gave him the green light. The human soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, checking their equipment and reviewing building schematics on tablet computers. "Rules of engagement?" Bradley asked simply. Peterson's response was equally direct. "Bring our people home alive, whatever it takes." The human approach was completely different from the alien assault. Instead of announcing their presence with energy barriers and formation advances, they moved like shadows through the forest surrounding the station. They had studied the building plans, but more importantly, they understood how desperate people behave when cornered. Bradley's team split into 3 pairs, each approaching from a different angle. They moved through storm drains, climbed ventilation shafts, and used the station's own security systems against the attackers. Where the aliens had tried to fight through obstacles, the humans flowed around them like water finding cracks in stone. They used psychological warfare that would have horrified the alien cadets. Strange sounds in the walls, lights flickering in patterns, voices whispering from empty rooms. They turned the station into a haunted house where the attackers jumped at shadows. 1 pair of humans entered through the cafeteria's garbage disposal system. Another came through the roof, using mountain climbing gear to rappel down elevator shafts. The 3rd team simply walked through the front door, disguised as janitors, pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies that were actually carefully concealed. Weapons. The hostiles, who had been so confident against the alien force, found themselves facing opponents who fought like they did, using everything available, ignoring conventional rules, and adapting constantly to changing situations. But there was one crucial difference. The humans were better at it. Where the attackers saw improvised weapons, the humans saw an entire arsenal waiting to be used. They turned the station's fire suppression system into a smokescreen, used the building's own speakers to create acoustic confusion, and employed medical equipment not as weapons, but as tools to treat wounded civilians during the firefight. The entire operation lasted 37 minutes from insertion to extraction. When it was over, all 23 civilians had been rescued. The hostile forces were neutralized, and not a single innocent person had been harmed in the crossfire. The alien students watched the after-action briefing in stunned silence. "Captain?" Bradley stood at the front of the room, calmly explaining tactics that defied everything they had learned about warfare. "We used the building's own security cameras to track hostile movements," he said matter-of-factly. "The ventilation system provided both concealment and routes of advance. Medical equipment helped us treat civilian injuries while maintaining operational security." Cadet Rex raised a shaking hand. "But how did you coordinate such complex movements without radio communications?" "We monitored all frequencies." Bradley smiled slightly. "Hand signals, reflected light, and good old-fashioned teamwork. When you've trained together long enough, you don't need radios to know what your teammates are thinking. The implications hit the alien students like physical blows. These humans had succeeded where their advanced training and superior technology had failed. They had saved lives that the aliens hadn't been able to protect, using methods that no galactic military academy would ever teach. As the briefing ended and the humans filed out, the alien cadets sat in their chairs trying to process what they had witnessed. Everything they believed about warfare, about civilization, about the proper way to conduct military operations, had been turned upside down in less than an hour. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't come to Earth to teach primitive warriors about civilized combat. They had come to learn what it truly meant to fight for something that mattered more than following rules or maintaining formations. They were learning what it meant to be human. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Mitchell as the sleek alien transport ship Concordia's Pride sat on the landing pad, its engines warming up for departure. 3 days had passed since the rescue mission at Research Station Echo, and the atmosphere around the base had completely changed. The alien students who had arrived with such arrogance and confidence now moved quietly, their heads full of thoughts they were still trying to process. Commander Velthor stood on the observation deck of the main building, looking down at the farewell scenes playing out below. Beside him, Colonel Jack Peterson watched his soldiers saying goodbye to students who had become something more than just visitors. They had become friends who finally understood each other. "I owe you a sincere apology," Velthor said softly, his translator rendering the emotion in his voice with surprising accuracy. "We came to your world believing we had great wisdom to share about the art of warfare. We thought we were teachers coming to educate primitive students." Peterson nodded toward the field below, where Sergeant Beth Collins was kneeling in the dirt with Cadet Rex, showing him how to read the subtle signs that indicated good hiding spots in natural terrain. "Education works both ways, Commander. Your technology is impressive, and your students are smart. There's always room for everyone to learn something new." Velthar was quiet for a long moment, watching his students absorb lessons that no galactic military academy could have taught them. "Perhaps that's true, but I believe my students learned the more important lesson here. We have spent centuries perfecting what we call civilized warfare, clean, efficient, technological solutions to military problems. But you humans have spent thousands of years perfecting something much more fundamental." "What's that?" Peterson asked. "Survival," Velt replied simply. "Pure, desperate, never give up survival. When we fight to win, according to rules and regulations. When you fight to live. There's a difference that all our advanced training never taught us." Down on the field, the conversations between humans and aliens had taken on a different tone than they had possessed just a week ago. The mutual respect was obvious in every gesture and word. Cadet Vera approached Captain Tom Bradley one final time before departure. Her crystalline features, which had once sparkled with arrogance, now showed genuine curiosity and humility. "I've been thinking constantly about something you said during the forest exercise. You told me that we were thinking like soldiers, but you were thinking like predators." Bradley studied her face carefully, seeing the change in her attitude. "What conclusions have you reached?" "On my home world of Proxima, we have ancient stories about the greatest predators in our history," she said slowly. "They were magnificent creatures, perfectly evolved for their environment. With incredible technology and flawless hunting techniques, they dominated their world for thousands of years." "What happened to them?" Bradley asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They went extinct," Vera replied with a sad smile. "They became too specialized, too perfect for one specific type of environment. When that environment changed, they couldn't adapt fast enough to survive. Meanwhile, smaller, more flexible creatures that seemed weaker became the ancestors of my species." She gestured around the human base, with all its improvised solutions and rough functionality. "You humans remind me of those survivor species. You're not the biggest or the strongest or the most technologically advanced, but you can adapt to absolutely anything. You can turn any environment into your ally, and any object into a tool. Bradley smiled with genuine warmth and respect. Now you're starting to understand what makes us tick. Adaptation, Vera said firmly. Adaptation is survival, and survival is everything. Across the field, other conversations were taking place that would have been impossible just days earlier. Major Kate Wilson was explaining to a group of alien students how human military units develop their almost telepathic coordination through shared hardship rather than advanced communication technology. It's not magic, she told them. When you've been through impossible situations together, when you've saved each other's lives and counted on each other in the worst moments, you start to think as one unit. You don't need radio communications when you know exactly how your teammate will react to any situation. Cadet Quinn, the tall four-armed alien who had fought Lieutenant Jake Torres, shook his massive head in amazement. Your species treats pain. An injury is just another piece of information to work around. On my world, a warrior with a broken rib would be hospitalized immediately. Different worlds create different people, Wilson replied. Earth taught us that stopping because you're hurt usually means dying. So we learned to keep moving no matter what. As the departure time approached, Commander Velthor gathered his students for a final formation. But instead of the rigid military precision they had displayed upon arrival, they moved with a new awareness of their eyes constantly scanned for threats and opportunities. Their minds clearly working through different scenarios and backup plans. The change in their thinking was obvious to every human who watched them. Captain Bradley found himself standing next to Lieutenant Torres as the aliens prepared to board their transport. Think they learned what they came here to learn? Bradley asked. Torres touched his still tender ribs and chuckled. They learned something, but I don't think it was what they expected. They came here to teach us about proper military procedure. Instead, they learned that sometimes proper procedure gets you killed. Think they'll remember these lessons when they get back to their fancy military academies. Look at them, Torres replied, nodding toward the alien students. Really, look at them. They move differently now. They think differently. You can't unlearn the truth about what real combat looks like. As the Concordia's pride lifted off, its powerful engines barely making a whisper of sound, the databanks carried something more valuable than any technology or weapon design. The ship's computers held detailed reports that would change how the entire galaxy thought about Earth and its inhabitants. Commander Velthor's final report to the Galactic Academic Consortium was brief, but revolutionary. Instead of the expected analysis of primitive human tactics that could be improved through proper education, his recommendation was completely different. Immediate establishment of human military exchange program requested, he wrote. Previous classification of Earth as primitive world requiring military education is completely incorrect. These Deathworlders possess survival instincts and adaptive combat capabilities that surpass our most advanced military training. Recommendation: we don't need to teach them, we need to learn from them. The report continued with detailed analysis of human military thinking, but the conclusion was stark in its honesty. Human military effectiveness stems not from superior technology or advanced tactical training, but from evolutionary adaptation to constant life or death situations. They have weaponized survival itself. Back on Earth, the human soldiers watched the alien ship disappear into the afternoon sky. The base felt oddly quiet, without their visitors, but the impact of their week together would last much longer. Think we'll see them again? Sergeant Collins asked. Colonel Peterson smiled as he watched the transport become a distant speck. Something tells me this is just the beginning. Once word gets out about what happened here, every military academy in the galaxy is going to want to understand how we do what we do. And what do we tell them? Peterson thought for a moment, then shrugged. The truth. We tell them that when your whole planet spends millions of years trying to kill you, you either learn to fight back, or you die. We're the descendants of the ones who learned to fight back. The lesson had been learned, but not by those who expected to learn it, in trying to educate primitive humans about civilized warfare. The galaxy's best military students had instead discovered that sometimes the most important battles are won not by those with the best training, but by those who simply refuse to quit. Earth was no longer just another world in the galactic community. It was now recognized for what it had always been, a planet that created the ultimate warriors, not through advanced technology or sophisticated tactics, but through the simple, brutal necessity of survival. The humans had taught the galaxy that sometimes the best weapon is the refusal to give up, no matter what the odds.